As you enter into week 4 of the class, you're going to complete the reading assignments for part 1 of the course, and that is a chapter on fairness, and that completes the an overview of the characteristics that constitute a good assessment or a good assessment item, and that is that assessment items should be valid, reliable, and fair. And so this week you're going to look at fairness in a lot more detail. So fairness, or free from bias, is probably something that you have experienced in your own life as a learner. And I'll give you some good examples of things that may not be that obvious from the readings, but these are elements of fairness that, again, I think have affected everybody, at some point in their journey as a learner. So one good example of something that's not fair are when you're assigned as an assessment an essay type item, and you know that your ability to write is going to be assessed as well as the content or the ideas that you're communicating. And I say that just because unless a teacher is committed to ensuring that you can write well, or clearly articulates that there's a prerequisite for learning a set amount of skills, and one of the prerequisites is that you can write at a certain level, then you're going to be being assessed over something that was not instructed over. And that, again, that's an element of fairness. Another issue that comes up is the use of vocabulary that not everybody might understand. That is, everybody who's being assessed. And so for example, if you were given an assessment item that said, choose the statement below that best distinguishes between, something and something. So that item assumes that you understand the author's use of the word distinguish or distinguished. And as you know, a word like distinguish or distinguished has different meanings. And whether or not you fully understand what is being asked depends on your understanding of how a teacher might be using that term. Now, if that's something that was taught clearly in advance of that assessment item, then that's okay. But oftentimes it isn't, and oftentimes there are certain there are certain words that are used by educators that they're just assumed are understood by everybody. But sometimes those assumptions can be really off, and they can impact how people respond to certain items. Something that always gives me a bit of a chuckle are when kids in earlier grades, like primary grades, are given assessments, maybe assessments about letters or vocabulary. And for example, they're asked to, circle all the images below that start with the letter A, for example. And then one of the items will be a line drawing of an aardvark. And again, unless a teacher clearly communicates and recognizes that all students know what an aardvark looks like, then that is probably going to be an unfair item for some people. So again, another common area in which fairness needs to be addressed. And then the last example that I want to give is something, again, that's very common, and that is, I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but if you've ever taken a test where there's a word problem, like a math test, and there's a word problem, and when you're trying to successfully complete the word problem, one thing that you might realize, or that you might not, is that there are multiple skills being applied within that word problem. And that's certainly okay. However, if you've never had a chance to practice solving problems that require you to apply multiple sets of rules, having never had an opportunity to practice that with feedback over how you're doing, then it really is not a fair assessment. And that could be one of the many reasons why people struggle with word problems on on math tests, you've got multiple skills being applied, and you may have, again, vocabulary or other language issues that also constitute some form of bias for some learners. So those are some very, very common ways in which assessment items might be unfair or might have bias issues that, that again, result in items not accurately measuring what they're intended to measure. So that's why the fairness part is really important. So you're going to read Chapter 5, and you're going to respond to some reflection questions, upload that. Also, at the end of the week, you're going to be having your first formal assessment in this class. So exam number 1 is going to measure all of the outcomes from 1.x to 4.x that are not italicized, so they're the ones that are actually measured. And if you've been keeping up with the chapter practice sort of quizzes, you'll have a clear example of how exam number 1 is going to measure those outcomes. So at the end of this week, when you're done reading Chapter 5, if you could complete the Chapter 5 practice items. Again, they only measure the learning outcomes that I'm interested in assessing that relate to Chapter 5. And take that practice. And if you have any issues, any things you don't understand, please reach out to me, contact me. Email me, call me, and I will be happy to debrief about that. But if you look at all of the practice items for each of the assigned chapters, they address all of the learning outcomes measured on exam number 1 and precisely how they're going to be measured on the exam. So it should be absolutely no surprise for you. And once again, exam number 1 is going to be timed. And it's open note, open book, but you won't really have enough time to reference every single thing. So you're going to have to make sure that you practice those practice items so you can look at the item on the assessment and then respond to it simply by applying the skills that hopefully you've learned over the last month. You won't be able to go back and review any items. Once you complete one of the assessment items, it'll move on to the next, and you can't go back. It's timed. So again, your best option for preparing for that is to complete all the practice items for each of the chapters, and let me know if there's anything that that you don't quite understand. So good luck with that. Again, the exam's at the end of this week. It doesn't interfere with the Valentine's weekend next week, so hopefully your head will be clear and you'll be ready for the Valentine's weekend, whatever that means to you. So, good luck.
Don't change your hair for me, not if you care for me. Stay, little Valentine, stay. Each day is Valentine's Day.